see comments on my second computer and seeing the screen on the first. Cool. So what I'm going to be going through here is just kind of my basic Capture One to Photoshop to print workflow. Should be about an hour. It's what I'm going to try to limit it to today. So I'll bring up the browser and Capture One. And so this is, actually want to do the canyon that I was in for the next video. So you can see I was doing a lot of focus blending here. So what I'll do is kind of show you what this looked like originally. I already put the crop on here that I was using, this 65 by 24 inch format or ratio. And what I'll do is just hit a new variant. And so that's what the Canon actually looked like. So I was using a 23mm lens on the Fuji 100 megapixel medium format camera. It's one I rented for the trip. I wasn't actually sure what I'd be doing on the trip. So I rented a giant camera with the idea of making some really big prints and not really knowing what these canyons would look like. And the first day I kind of had, on the first day I kind of had a hard time just like getting a handle of the camera and what to photograph while I was there. So what I ended up doing is switching to the super wide angle lens, a 23mm lens on the medium format sensor, which I have no idea what the 35mm equivalent is. But what I ended up seeing were these really, really long, skinny format pictures. With that lens, I could get really close to one of these canyon walls and bring in some super far space and some super close space. And with the focus blending, kind of mishmash the space together so that the ambiguity kind of really came into play of like, how big is this stuff? How big are these canyon walls? And kind of interacting with like this long firm out stuff coming in and out and kind of just messing with your perception of space. So that's kind of what I really dove into on the second day here. So the format looks a little bit like this, but this is what the Canon actually looked like. This is getting kind of late in the day. This is in the winter time. This is February. So it was kind of 3 o'clock. I started getting a little bit cold and dark in Death Valley. So, and the car was maybe 4 miles away. So I had to kind of photograph and kind of walk back as I was photographing. So this is about what it looked like. I threw the auto correction on here and I probably had it in Velvia is what the camera was set on. Capture One, when it's connected with the Fuji auto curves, we'll just kind of bring in whatever was set in the camera. So a lot of them, if you see black and white, like this one, I had it set in the black and white mode when I was photographing. This one I was doing in color just to kind of see what these colors look like on these edges in the background. And I'm going to keep glancing over to the second computer with the comments. So feel free to pop a comment in there. And I'll answer it kind of when I stop and I'll check over and look at the comments here. So the first thing I usually do in here is one, I'll just get rid of the browser so we can see that full screen. And I'll hide that so we can see larger and view. We're going to get rid of those viewer labels. We don't want to see the f-stops and all that stuff. Irrelevant here. So first thing I'll do is just bring down the highlights. You can see I'm kind of blowing out the sky there. We're not going to probably use the sky, but I just want to kind of see what's here. Bring up the shadows a touch. I'm going to mess with the white at all. And bring up the blacks just a touch. I always, let's see, I forgot. Okay, maybe I do need the browser tabs here. ISO 100 is 1/6 of a second, so I'm not going to use any noise reduction. So what I'll do is go into full screen here and actually maybe go over to here so we can see focus. So that's one of my far exposures. I was trying to find like the sharper area in this picture. Looks like it's back there. There we go. So basically what I'll do is go into the noise reduction and just turn it all the way down for all of these. So something like maybe like this. Just to get all the detail that I can in there. I don't want to smush out any of these tones here. Bring up the clarity a little bit. This one might actually be a touch soft. So I'll go down to fit screen, bring up the browser, and try another one. See if this one looks sharper. So I'll clone or make a new variant, and there we go. So this is a bit underexposed, but that's all right. What I found with the sensor is I almost did not need to do some focus or exposure bracketing. Just bringing up the shadows is going to do almost everything you need to do with it. You can see there's like detail for days. The highlights, not so much. So I try to underexpose just a touch and then bring that up. So then hide the browser, go back to, there we go. That's a bit better. But I'll turn down the noise reduction and increase the clarity a touch. I didn't generally do just about 10 to 15, 10 to 20 on the background layer just to kind of get started. Yeah, see, this is kind of so amazing with this canyon. We have stripes going down vertically and these veins going kind of at a diagonal. It's pretty incredible to be there. And yeah, some of these quartz veins on the left, a little bit more on the right, but these ones in the back here are just kind of crazy. Basically, I think the foreground, all the rocks is a bit distracting. That's why I squished it down to that 65 by 24 format. So let's see what else I'll do. I might just bring up the saturation a touch, just to kind of separate these things back here. And see what else. Be kind of general here. What I will do is jump into, to use a loop. So I always kind of default back to the loop and just kind of see how some of these details and tones are working out like that. And all right, so we have 9 people here. So I'm taking a look at the second screen to look at comments. So if you have any questions as I'm going through this, just pop them into the chat and I'll glance over and answer them as we're going. If you're just joining us, I'm going to do my general Capture One and Photoshop workflow and hopefully keep this to about an hour and maybe even get to print. So I'm going to try to cruise through just a little bit. But at this point, I will jump over to my local adjustments and I will do a bit of a detail boost with this Luma range. So what I generally do is make a new adjustment with the background inverted, or is a new filled adjustment layer, and kind of do something like this, and you'll see what this mask looks like. So it's going to feather from the midtones all the way into the shadows. And when I apply that, I can then hop into clarity. It's going to take a second because of doing the screen share and Capture One stuff. So you can see I bring up the clarity and it's going to be applied mostly to the midtones. It's going to mask out those the extreme highlights and the shadows. And I can do that with the sharpening as well. So pop down to sharpening. Let's do that. So this is just going to stick into the midtones and not do anything with any halos anywhere. And what else? Now at this point, maybe I'll go over to the black and white settings and see about doing the conversion in Capture One, or if I want to leave it in color and do the conversion in Photoshop. So first I'll bring up the reds because I'm looking at these stripes in the back, and then I mentioned here these kind of horizontal diagonal stripes that were, I think they were orange against the blue, so those are going to separate out kind of nicely. I'm not sure if that's like, so if you look down here, those are also in there. I'm not sure if this is just catching the light differently, but yeah, I don't know. That's kind of why I wanted to go into these canyons, just to see how light reflects off these things differently like this, and how that kind of translates into this like abstraction when you go into the into black and white. So I'll drop some of the cyans and blues, bring up some of the yellows and reds. And if I stop talking, it's mostly because I'm just like thinking, and my eyes and my mouth can't work at the same time. All right, that's starting to look okay. I'm going to dodge this a little bit and maybe bring out some of the contrast through these streaks here. So I'll hop back over to local adjustments and make a new filled adjustment layer. And here I'll just use a curve. So I'm going to bring up the highlights, bring down the shadows. So now I'm just like working with the kind of highlight midtone separation, try to leave the shadows about where they are. And let's go into high dynamic range, maybe bring the shadows up just a touch. And that's going to be applied kind of all over, but we can get into here and brighten these things up. Bring these shadows back down. So it's kind of subtle mid-tone stuff. I'm going to overdo it here and then come back and adjust more. Another cool thing we can do, just like thinking about this, is use a luma range on top of this. So we'll kind of leave it highlights where they are and do something like this. So since I inverted it and then adjusted it, it's using this adjustment here to do the luma range. What I mean by inverted, I mean made a filled adjustment layer and messed with the curve and then applied the luma range. So if I hit mask here, see it's being applied everywhere because of the feather. If we go back into here, I bring this into maybe something like that. Now you see it's the red areas are now where I'm going to be applying the adjustment. So then I can do a invert mask. And if I hide it, see nothing's in there. So then I can go with a brush and just paint into those areas that were selected with the luma range. So bringing up some contrast in this area here on this edge and then back in here. And I generally leave the mask turned off while I'm doing this, and I will, just for sake of time, increase the opacity and flow just so this happens a little bit quicker. So you see I'm only doing this to one image at this point, but I do have a focus stack here. So what I'll do is once I get this one set, I will copy the adjustments from this one to each of the variants that I'm using in the focus stack and then blend them in Photoshop. I don't use any third-party focus stacking software. I probably should if I do this more often, but for this trip, I'm just using Photoshop blend layers to do it. So now I'm kind of just lightening these things up and catching some of the shape of the canyon here as I'm doing this, this dodging, this contrast adjustment. And if we can turn that on and off, you hopefully see it's going to be a little subtle probably, but you see some of those things pop out a bit. And I'm going to catch these some more. So lots of quick little actions with the brush and just building up this in here. All right. At this point, I'll throw the crop on because the ground is getting a little distracting. So throw in the crop. I have a preset for the 65 by 24 and a 13 by 19. And there's also the built-in 16 by 19, 16 by 9. So why don't we do the 16 by 9 first? And so if you want to keep it right in the center, you don't grab at the top, you grab at the side. And as soon as you touch it, it centers it for you. And then you can move where you want. I'm going to reset that and jump. I know I want the 65 by 24. So if I touch the side, there it goes. I think the middle is still a little there's too much stuff right in here. So I'll just bring it up. And what I'll look for is the stuff on the bottom corners and the top corners. And that's going to be kind of controlling where I place the crop. Not so much in the middle because the middle is what's in the middle. But with these pictures, the edges are kind of defining the picture. The relationship of these shapes on the edges to the other shapes throughout the picture. So I'm just going to move it up and down to kind of see what feels right. And something like that. And then hit enter, and that should, yeah. The new version of Capture One is nice, where you hit return on the keyboard and actually applies the crop rather than like setting the compare variant. So it works a little more like Photoshop in that way. I do think it's still a little too flat, and so you'll kind of notice in all of my editing, I start really flat and then start to build contrast on top of it. You can always get more contrast. It's hard to get less contrast as you're doing these adjustments. So I'll do another local adjustment, fill the adjustment layer so I can see what I'm doing here. Go into the curve. You can select this to grab a point on the curve, and I'll drag that up. So I'm looking at these shapes here on these edges, and then bring the shadows back down. So it's just going to increase the contrast. Kind of a lot, but then I'll use the re-invert the layer, and then use a brush to get back in there. See, that's too much. It's because I had that too high, because before I was using the Luma range to grab those. Now I'll go a little bit quick just so we can move this along. I would generally kind of pour a glass of whiskey and do this late at night. But this is a Sunday afternoon, so I have a cup of coffee here, and I'm going a little bit quicker. So now I'll just grab some highlights on this right edge, kind of bring some of these tones back in here. So you see the horizontal shapes here. So I'm using the pen tablet horizontally to grab those shapes. We can see what that's starting to look like. So I kind of treat this like sketching. So just like kind of sketching on the picture with the pen tablet to bring out these tones. And come back over here, maybe grab some detail back down in this corner. So what I'm doing here is using, sorry about the mic, using the tones in the image to kind of start sculpting and playing one side of the picture off of the other side. It's kind of a like almost abstract expressionist kind of reaction to the picture. And that's kind of why I love working in black and white too, is because I can do these kinds of edits and kind of see what the picture reveals. It's like sculpting with tones. And yeah, so I'll talk and kind of go back and do some more. But it's like a conversation from the right side to the left side, just like these things moving in and out like this, trying to create this dynamic stuff from all this kind of smushed over chaos. And using those tones to kind of define what those relationships are and like your interaction with those relationships. So it's kind of like, you know, going into this, I had no idea what I would end up photographing. And that's kind of what I started responding to, looking through that wide format, and playing these like subtle things on the edges off of each other. And not that I'm saying I'm not interested in the like middle of the picture. It's there. It's like, it's good to have that, but like, you know, it's really kind of to set the stage for these things that are interacting on the edges. I'll pop back over to the screen share. And at this point, it might be better to hop over to Photoshop because I'll have some more control over luminosity masks and bringing out more separation and contrast through here. Actually, before I do that, I do want to pull some more detail out of this right edge just so I can have some more tones to work with when I go into Photoshop. So a new field adjustment layer and combination of a curve and shadow recovery. So that's obviously way too light, but I can deal with that. That might be a good point there. And re-invert that mask, get a brush, make it a little bit, larger this time, and grab these details here. So what's my opinion on Capture One versus Lightroom Photoshop? I really dislike the way Lightroom deals with local adjustments, where you have to create a point, do some kinds of edits to it, and keep moving these things around. Capture One with the adjustment layers works a lot more similarly to Photoshop and the adjustment layers and masks. So that's why I kind of use well, when I first started using Capture One, it was just a better raw editor than a raw conversion than I thought Lightroom was, and that was maybe 2014. Then when they introduced the adjustment layers with this kind of masking, and especially with curves in the adjustment layers, it was like, okay, never looking at Lightroom again. Not say I don't look at it, but for my work, like, it's all about the adjustment layers and what you can do with this kind of painting in the tones here that just is a little bit less intuitive in Lightroom. And now that Capture One supports the Fuji medium format, it just kind of makes it I don't say no-brainer for me, but like these tools are kind of dialed in where it's like muscle memory in a lot of ways. So trying to switch back to Lightroom just doesn't really make sense for me. I know it kind of gets a little more expensive where you have a $20 Capture One subscription and then another $10 to $50 photo or Adobe subscription. But if this is what you do, like, it's like a tank of gas now. So not that anyone's really driving anywhere, but you know what I mean. It's like, in the scheme of things, it's not that much, especially if you use it in your work. So let's kind of go through, and I'm going to now jump over to Photoshop. So what I'll do here is I'm okay with the conversion in Capture One. So I'm going to actually star this because this is going to be the one I use for all of the other adjustments here. So I'm going to select all these others I kind of already did some work on that has the focus blend, and make new variants of these. So just so I can get back to the starting point. And then on this 5-star here, I will copy the adjustments, then go to these variants I just created. And I have the edit all selected variants up here selected. So it should apply that to all 3 of these with the crop and all the adjustments. Oh, looks like this is a different picture. See how I changed the edges here? I got a little bit closer. I'll need to back up. That's the problem having the bottom of your screen cut off. You didn't see the change there. The other thing I kind of realizing with these 100 megapixel files is that I'm running out of processor on this old Mac Pro. Yeah, see, these two were okay. That one's good. This one will undo. Actually, just delete this variant. Oh, not all of them, just this one. So this is the truth of editing. It's always mistakes and going back. So delete variant. We'll grab, that one seemed to be out of focus, so we won't use that one. Good one. I selected that one. It actually might be enough. And this one. Just making sure these are all the same here. And then I'll go and process these. I should have given these a star rating, but it's okay. Looks like we got all good 3 of them. Good. So I'll just go over here, go to my TIFF 16-bit grayscale output, and just go into my Marble Canyon folder and process those. So while that's processing, anybody have any questions in the chat here? Anything you'd like to see when I hop over to Photoshop? Just type that in and we'll get to that. Let's see, pop over to Photoshop here. still, yeah. So since I have the screen share, the stream, and Capture One running, it's just doing a little slow here. So good time to chat. I will be doing a whole kind of review of the Fuji. You know, it's hard to say because I don't do camera reviews. I kind of, this is gonna be like a little secret, but I kind of don't get excited about cameras. I get excited about pictures and pictures I can make with the cameras, but not cameras themselves. I treat it like almost like an 8x10, right? You got a piece of film, you got some bellows, and you got a lens. You just matter where you point them, and then the rest of it comes into printing. So 30 seconds left for this last one. So the buttons, there are kind of too many buttons on the camera. I want to kind of like dial it down to be as simple as possible. Just like how to focus, how to make the picture, how to adjust your aperture settings like that. It took me about a day to kind of get it dialed in. That was like that first video I made, walking up Slit Canyon. I used that day to kind of get it dialed in, and then really started photographing this place on the second day. So, all right, this is all exported now. These are coming in to be with the crop in 16-bit grayscale 100 megabyte files. So I'll just drag those. Let me switch back over. So I'll drag those into Photoshop. And just kind of cycle through again. Okay, and I will go into full screen. And so what I'll do is go to File, Scripts, load files into Stack. Don't create smart objects, I never do that. Automatically align. They're on the tripod, they should all be aligned, but if they're not, they'll do kind of any little adjustments there. And this saves the time from like opening each one and then putting them into, oh, did I? No, it looks okay. Not sure why my panels are not showing up. All right, reset my workspace. There we go. I guess I did apply some. Yeah, it's like weird. I'll have to crop that out or just redo this. But for the video, I'm not going to worry about that now. I think I probably applied some perspective control, and that did not get copied over. So, oops. But anyway, what we'll do is do the focus blend now. So I'll select all three of them, go to Edit, Auto Blend Layers, and do the stack. And I do not check the seamless tones and colors. It kind of sometimes feels like it makes artifacts. So we'll figure that out for a moment, and then we'll go into doing some more cool stuff here with some actions and things I made. What I'll generally do is just disable this background layer, and you can kind of see what these others two look like. But then I'll zoom in and just check how it worked out. Yeah, I know that this is kind of the problem with doing this in Photoshop, is how it kind of doesn't know where some of these areas are. It's kind of guessing. On some of these, I actually went in and did the focus blending manually, just with the layers like this. But this looks just kind of going all the way over. This looks fine. Cool. So I'll do a fit to screen and zoom out just once so it all fits. And the kind of bad problem with having such these long pictures is you have all this white space top to bottom. But that's the way it is. All right, so first thing I'll do, this looks good. I'll just convert them all down to, one layer and do a new layer from background. If this was not the video, I would do this a little more carefully and kind of make sure that on these edges before flattening, you see how there's like these artifacts on these edges? I would go in and make sure those are correct. but I'm not going to bore you guys with that right now. So layer, new background from layer. Cool. Then I'll go to my actions. I have a detail boosting action I kind of always run at the start of these. This detail boost. So it's going to copy it, do some edge masking, and so what this layer is doing is it's copying the background, doing some high radius, low amount sharpening, doing some layer masking stuff, and then also I don't even remember what it's doing now. I built this a while ago, but lots of edge masking so that the detail boost is only being applied to things that are not the edges. So the overall general tonality. So if we hide that for a moment and zoom in, you can kind of see what this looks like. So it's kind of subtle detail. But this is just a starting point. So now I can actually go in and do the good work. All right, so this is my quick approach to focus blending. Here, this is where I do most of my work, is with curve. And if you watch my other videos, it's all generally the same idea. Create a curve. It's got a white mask on it. Then you invert the mask. And I've been doing a lot of just kind of luminosity mask on the fly. So what I'll do is just hop over the gray channel, load it. So this is going to be applied to the highlights or the lighter tones, and make a softer brush. And let's do a lower opacity and flow. So people keep asking me why I use, oh yeah. So Michael asked, what's the focus stacking do to the file size? They're they're about 100 megabytes for each layer. So it depends on how many you have. This one only had 3. So for a short while, they had 300 megabytes. Then did some adjustments and smushed them down. So that's I think if I look at the file size now, it's going to be 200 plus this layer. Document sizes still about 100, and 200 with the layers. So we're still working with 100 megabyte files. It's not crazy. Once you start getting into more adjustment layers, more channels, and individual layers, it'll get to maybe a gigabyte with these files. Obviously more if you're doing color, like 3 times as much with color. So, and then so Jeffrey asked then, how do I do the planning, the focus stack? I'm sorry. I think I was on the video the whole time here, and you could not see my my screen. I'm sorry about that. Still getting used to these keyboard shortcuts I set up for the switching. So how do I do the planning for it? I'll kind of back up for a minute. In Utah 2017, I used the GFX 50, and I treated it more like a regular film medium format camera, and would stop the lens down to like 16 to 22. And that made me some blurry pictures, too much diffraction. So for this trip, I was like more aware of that, and would stop down to, I think, f8 is probably the max. F8 to f11 is the smallest aperture I would use. So for the most part, I would open up the lens all the way to kind of set the focus points, just so I'm not seeing the depth of field in the preview. I would zoom into 100% and actually like physically like tap on the back of the camera and like to set my focus point, and it will autofocus on that area, and I would make a picture there. And then I move to the next one, set the focus point. So the determination of where to focus and how many layers to stack was dependent on the canyon I was in and how close I was. So with this one, I was not that close to either of these walls on either edge. So that's why I only did 3. And the wall in the background is really not that far away. So, so I probably could have gotten away with 2 and maybe F8. Excuse me. But some others, like I was this far from one of the canyon walls, and so maybe that far. So it was like right up in the corner. And so I'd focus on that area and like hope that the minimum focus distance was long enough or short enough. In some cases it wasn't, and those got cropped or thrown in the trash. But I would set that and then just double check and set the next one, double check the focus, and then set the last one. Usually I did 3 to 5, and it seems like it was enough and almost like more than adequate. I hope that answers the question well enough. So now I'll hop back over to my screen here. And so if you missed that, I'm going to delete this layer here and deselect. And I'll kind of show you that luminosity mask on the fly here. So what I'll do is do an adjustment layer. And I'm going to look at these horizontal tones in here and maybe some of those. So I'll drop this down and bring the shadows back up. Maybe right into there. And then invert this layer and go into channels and just load the luminosity as a selection and hide the marching ants. Then get the brush and start doing some dodging in here. So I'm just bringing out just like I was doing in Capture One, but now with a little more control because of the way the luminosity masks work in Photoshop. So then I'm just kind of coming in here, grabbing some of these tones. And then I'm going to do the same with some of the darker tones in the background here. First, I'll just kind of grab this in here. And actually, after I develop or then release the new version of my profiling software for Quad-Tone Rip, I'm going to start developing some Photoshop action panels to do some of the stuff I do repetitively. Just because even if I don't end up selling them, I always kind of do something like this. I'm going to actually do it right now. I will make a new adjustment. This will be for the shadows. So I'll bring up those and maybe, so I'm trying to get this separation of this background here. And I will invert the layer. So now I want to target the dark tones. So I have to go to the channels, load that as selection, then Command-Shift-I to invert the selection, then so here's how you see what you have selected. You go to, so it looks like I still have the highlights. I'm looking at the histogram. Hey, what's going on? Oh no. Ha, I was pressing Option at the same time. I wanted to select the darker tones. But I look at the histogram to see if the left or the right edge is selected. And hide those ants. And now with the brush tool, I'll go in and, so now this is leaving those lighter midtones alone and grabbing the darker midtones and those deep shadows. And so if we actually looked at the histogram, there's not much deep shadow in there in these tones back here. So it's going to kind of be feathered in a little bit nicer. So I'm like, when I'm doing this, you start to see different things in the picture. Like I noticed this darker line right on that bottom edge. So I'll just go in and accentuate that a little more, and then you do the next one, and it kind of creates this rhythm of horizontal lines going up from the bottom, and that plays off the rhythm of the vertical lines at the edges, and then they kind of invert on the right edge. So now what were these dark lines through here become light lines here. So then maybe I'll deselect, hop back down to this layer. And without doing any masking, just paint in a little bit. So I'm just very lightly touching these tones here. And lighten that whole edge a little bit now. Here's a cool thing you can do as well, is do a new layer first. So do a big lightening layer. kind of leave the shit. Well, let's lighten everything. This will be a good example. And then now I will invert that and go to channels, luminosity, hide that. Let's drag that to the top. So I'm hiding the marching ants, and I'll use a gradient. So G for gradient, shift to get to your foreground, and we'll select up here. So I'm using foreground to transparent, and that allows you to, oh, I need to make sure I'm lower opacity, maybe 30%. And I'll drag in from the edges, and you kind of see, see what that looks like. So I look in the mask, it's real subtle, but because there's really not much light tones in that edge, it's kind of very subtly bringing it in there. So G for gradient and drag in from those edges some more. And then I can go over to the other side. So that's the nice thing about having the transparent or the foreground color to transparent is you can do multiple drags and then kind of overlap each other and layer those tonal adjustments up. I'm not sure why. Looks like my layer is 100. For some reason, the gradient did not look like it was happening. And it's probably just because of the luminosity. So I'll just continue doing this, building those tonal adjustments up there. Now I see it coming through. Maybe a touch from the bottom. So it seems like the light is coming, reflecting a little bit differently through there. Maybe I'll do a lower opacity. And the nice thing is here you can go in and lower the opacity of the layer. Or switch back to a brush and grab some of these finer areas. And so I'm kind of looking at this stuff back in here. I want to bring out these darks a little bit more to try to separate this nice kind of weird reflected stuff that's going on there. So I'll pop back down to, usually I'll name these layers, but you can just click here and like, okay, that's one that was darker, that's lighter. Deselect, I'll make a new one. But you kind of see how I always deselect first, then get the adjustment layer. Otherwise, if I undo that, if I have some tonal range selected, like highlights or shadows, and then I make an adjustment, it already applies the mask to the whole thing. So whatever I do here, now it's being applied everywhere in the image rather than locally based on where I paint. So I'll just delete the mask, Command D to delete, make sure I don't have a selection, and then load a black mask. And I'll temporarily disable it. That doesn't work. Oh, here's what I'll do. So this is just an example of another technique I always use is I disable the mask, then I throw a curve on there. This is another one of those luminosity masks on the fly. So you can define the tonal range you want to select first. So this is going to be selecting the darks and leaving the highlights more or less selected. So then you go to channels, load that, Command Shift I to select the darks, Command H to hide the ants, and then re-enable the mask, or re-enable the mask. And now when you do the painting, you have that adjustment in there as the basis of the mask. So now I can go back here. I'm going to zoom a sorry, I thought I had Do Not Disturb turned on. Get out of here. There we go. Sorry about that. I have to get my brain back on the train. What were we doing? We're going to paint in it with a little more zoom to see what we're painting here. So I should be painting in the dark so I can look at the histogram. Yep, got the dark selected and pretty high opacity, so it should happen pretty quick in here. And I'm not doing very kind of controlled painting here because of I know I'm painting into the shadows, and that I have that mask on there that is really defining it in the shadows or the selection. And that's kind of what it looks like. So because of the way it's selected, you kind of, it already hides the effect of that adjustment, you know, the artifact of it. And I am doing this a little bit faster for the video than I would if I was being a little more considered with how these things are relating. Do you see like this line up here? That's just an artifact of the focus blending. So see it's kind of out of focus. I'm actually not going to print this until I fix that because I don't want to waste the ink, but I will kind of go through in the last 10 minutes here how I do get set up to print. So let's see. I'll also kind of just generally look back at the starting point and the end point, and just see how things are relating there. So at this point, I actually might make a proof print if I was actually doing it. And I'm printing these 30. Let's see, what size are there? Like 22 by 40, I think is what my big size, or my kind of starting big size for these prints are. But I'll do the proofing at like a 13 by 19 inch paper. And with these long formats, I actually get 2 per sheet. So I can lay these out in Print Tool and print 2 up at once just to do some proofing, and then I'll trim them after. All right, so let's just say that this is done. So what I'll do here is Command-Shift-E to make a new layer, and I'll call this merged. And then I'll go to some sharpening actions I have. And this is going to be in that panel I'm starting to build. So deselect everything just to make sure I have the whole range here, and I have a Grayscale print sharpening. Oh, before I do that, let's change the print size because I do want to preview at print size. So I'll do Command-Shift-I for print size. Turn off resampling. So native print size at 360 is 12 by 30. 300 is 14 by 38. I'll just give you, I know this is not going to translate to the actual screen size here, but for me, I put the pixel resolution into the screen so I can actually preview at print size. So I'll do this for previewing the sharpening. So let's say this is actually going to be my print size. I will now run the action at this print size here. So I'll go to Grayscale print sharpening and play that. And this is also one of those actions that does multiple sharpening passes, one for the details, one for the highlights, one for the shadows, or the dark edge or light edges. But I also have some additional edge masking settings plugged in here. So you're not seeing the edge masking with the preview, but this is doing the dark edges first. So you can see on the layers, it says sharpen dark edges. It already has the high pass filter with the detail mask on there, kind of as the layer below the sharpen dark edges. So here, because it's a larger print, I'm going to increase the radius a bit, and the amount will stay the same. And press OK there, and then so first it's doing the sharpening and then turning it to a darken blend mode, and then applying the mask to it. So it's only going to be sharpening the edges. Here I'll also increase the radius by 1 pixel for the lighter edges. So the whole idea of this is you will see the light halos before you see the black halos. So that's why I sharpen those edges separately at a different radii. So I kind of select with the little dropper a certain area and then on and off. So I'm actually seeing the print size and the 100% here, and I'll accept that. and then it throws it into a group here. The group is set to 80%. The light edges is set to 60%. Dark edges is 100, and then the detail is also 80, and then so it's blending into the merge mask down here. So if you look at the detail mask, you see it's blocked out the edges and showing that mid-tone stuff. And if we look at the dark edges, there's a little bit of a feather on the mask as well. So if you turn the feather off, it's sharper edges. I use actually just undo 1.5 for that, and I think 1.5 for, it's 0.8 for the feather on the lights also. So this is only sharpening the edges, and then is kind of defining the lighter dark edge, and then lightening or lowering the opacity. So it kind of dials back some of that sharpening effect, but it still gives a nice sharp without having halos or being brittle in the actual print. Depending on the tonal range and how big I will print, I'll then also throw on some grain. And the way what the grain does is just so it's kind of like one of my philosophies on digital files compared to like how film used to look is the digital can have a almost plastic, overly smooth effect. So if we look in some of these areas, without I'll blow up to, let's see, go to 200. It's too big. Let's go to 100. Like this is a good example. On these here, the detail kind of smushes out. It becomes a little bit flat, and I call it plasticky feeling. And if you throw the grain on there, that grain, those little dots and in the grain will just kind of break up those edges a little bit, so it gives it a more film-like natural feeling that hides some of that plastic feeling. And so in the grain layer, I have a general overall, and then so when I built this action, I built the grain to be larger and smaller, kind of more randomly, kind of to simulate how film also has like larger and smaller film grains. So I have some general dark and light, and then an overall kind of soft light blend mode, also with that various size grain there. So if I zoom in, hopefully you can see this. Maybe can we see this a little bit easier? This may be a good example. And I know you probably can't see it because of the resolution through YouTube and the screen share. It's kind of a hard thing about doing this without being in person and like showing the effect on actual screen and the prints. But there's with the grain on. And so we're kind of seeing these edges just being broken up a little bit. Kind of looking at this white edge against this kind of more mid-tone here. Also through here as well. So that's off. So it's a little too smooth. And then that just breaks it up a little bit. And it kind of gives you the perception of more detail when it's really just adding a little bit of noise to the image. So we'll go back down to print size. Here, usually what I'll do is before doing the sharpening and before merging, I'll save as like an edited copy. So I'll call it working copy, or like just put a W at the end of the file name. And then when I go to actually do the printing, turn everything back on and just do a save as. What I'll do, so when I'm doing a focus stack, I want to know which pictures I actually used. I'll choose that file name and then put a dash and choose the last file name. So it's 0222. So it's going to be a range of these. And then sharpen, so SHG for sharpened with grain proof. And then I'll not sharpen or not save the layers. Then if I'm happy with it, I will save a master copy with it with the layers, and I'll say F as final in layers. Then I'll save a second one that is final flattened and use that for sharpening for different print sizes or digital negatives, because I'll do digital negatives separately than the inkjet prints. For this, I'll just do an inkjet print. So what I'll do is go to print tool. And I'll use the we'll paper print size and set up a 13 by 19, use quad tone rip. I actually don't have the printer plugged in because I was using the laptop for printing the other day. But I have, let's see, curve none. This is just a warm selenium blend I made. So it's going to be like a warm purple. And for proofing, I'd use bidirectional. If you wanted, I could add in the warm neutral. So something like that. So a little more selenium, or you can do split tone with a little more selenium in the shadows and more midtones through the more natural midtones and highlights. Save that, and then we'll throw that picture on there. Rotate, and I'll use this so I can see actually the whole thing here. That'll fit. I want to use like a 1-inch top and bottom border, so 1 inch there. Oh, I have to change the size, don't I? So height, it's 19 inches. Let's do a 17-inch print, so it's barely able to get 2 on here. Let's just say I had a second picture. I would really try to, so I actually might have to just do a 6-inch. That's the nice thing, is you can type in whatever size you want here. The other one kind of snaps to it, and something like that. So that would be my proof print, and turn off color management, because the calibration software I use to build the curves, the QTR curves, is dealing with that. So then I would let that print and slice it up and then hang them up on my board to do some evaluation. So that is going to cut it for today. That's been about the hour. So anybody have any other, I'm going to switch over to the camera now. Anybody have any other questions before we cut it off here? I know there's a little bit of delay, so type them in, and we'll hop in it for a second. So I'm looking at the second computer here. But I hope to do these once a month, and just close that up there. Yeah, do these about once a month for everybody on YouTube, and then, oh, okay, I was just checking the things here. And then for my Patreon people, I'm going to do a combination of darkroom work and image editing work. So coming up is going to be mixing albumin. So I got 3 dozen eggs. I have my glacial acetic acid and some salt. We're going to make up some albumin solution. It's fresh from scratch. So if you want to get on that, it's going to be a private Zoom thing later in the week. So you can join for $5 a month. You can join at 10 and get a postcard in the mail. Or if you want some like one-on-one critiques, that's like $100 a month. So lots of levels, but I think it's kind of cool to see how people work in the darkroom. But the first, I'm kind of anxious to mix up some albumin. So I've got eggs from the farmer's market from yesterday. So we're going to mix that up later in the week. And then probably next week after that, do some coating of the albumin. So it's got to age a little bit. So yeah, mix it this week, print next week. I'm going to try to print these large albumin prints. So I have to find a larger tray. But for right now, just to kind of demonstrate, I'll use, and just to do some albumin proofing to dial in the toning, I'll use just whatever that is. Who knows? 16 inches, something like that. 16, 18-inch paper. And go down to the darkroom and print through there. So that'll be fun. Oh, I'm sorry. I was just checking the comment here. But anyway, it'll be fun to watch. Fun to kind of have some people hang out in the darkroom with me while I'm doing it. And with a Zoom, I'll be able to do like a 2-way thing. So we won't just be like written comments. It'll be some like live interaction stuff. I won't bore you with too many cracking the eggs and separating, but actually like doing the chemistry mixing and stuff, and some of that will kind of be fun to hang out and do that. So that's going to be it. Hope everybody has a good week. And this will go live if you want to retouch it. The recording will be up later. So for now, I'm going to cut this out and see everybody later in the week, or next week, or next month, whichever you choose to do. All right. Take care, everybody.